Finish this video and you'll know everything you need to know about completing the square for GCSE maths, and there'll be some questions for you to practice on as we go along. Now I will get into the tutorial soon, I promise, and you can skip ahead if you want to go straight to it. But first I'm going to show you where you can actually use completing the square, because it will come up in your exams. So say we complete the square and got this expression right here. There's two things we can do with it. The first is find the turning point of the parabola, and that's basically either the lowest point if it's a U-shaped positive graph, or the highest point if it's an n-shaped negative graph. And this one's going to be positive, so it's going to be this minimum point right here. And how do we find the minimum point? Well, it's quite simple. It's just going to be whatever x value makes this whole bracket here equal to 0. So basically the opposite of this value right here. Just like if you had a double bracket right here, x minus 3, x plus 5. The two solutions to x would be the two values that make the bracket 0. So x equals 3 and x equals minus 5, which is also just the inverse sign of what's ever in front of the number right here. So right here, the x value, or the x coordinate, would be 2. And then next for the y coordinate, it's just a number outside, right here. So we can think of it being the negative for the x value and just the original positive value for the y. But did you know you can also use this completed square form to find the two values of x? Or in other words, where the parabola will intersect the x-axis, which you can find with factorizing or the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula actually comes from completing the square. But you might know that factorizing doesn't always work. But this will always work to find the values of x. So all we have to do is move this term onto the other side. That's the first step. So x minus 5 squared, and since it's negative, we're going to add 3 to both sides, giving us x minus 5 squared equals 3. And then the next step is going to be to square root both sides. And there's one important thing you need to remember to do this. And that's that you're going to have the plus and minus of the square root of 3. And it's kind of obvious that positive square root of 3 squared equals 3. But you might not know that negative the square root of 3 squared actually equals 3. And you can try this on your calculator if you don't believe me. So once we've got these two values, which they are kind of two separate values, we just have to add the value here. So add the minus 5, giving us x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 3. And this basically means that there's two solutions, which is what you would expect if you had the double brackets, for example. So x either equals 5 minus the square root of 3, or x equals 5 plus the square root of 3. So if you substituted that back in here, this whole thing would equal out to 0. So now we know how we can use the completed square version of a quadratic. Here's my simple completing the square tutorial that I hope every GCSE student can understand. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a bracket squared, and we're going to put the constant term, or the minus 8, out here. And then now the tricky part comes of what we put inside this bracket. And it's just going to be the x squared term, so just the x. But we're going to get rid of that squared because it's on the outside of the bracket. And then we're going to do half of this term right here, keeping it positive because it's positive in the original expression. And then the reason we do half of it, if you care to know, is that imagine this was a double expanded bracket like this. You can see that the two x squareds would come together to make the x squared up here. And then the 2x and the other 2x would form the 4x. But you might also notice that the 2 times the 2 would give us a plus 4, which is why we need to actually take away 4 from here. So the rule for this is that we always take away the square of this number here. And earlier, we've gone over how the square of a negative number is always positive. So that means that if this was minus 2 right here, the square of it would be 4. So what we would do is we'd still take away 4. So even if it's positive or negative inside here, no matter what, we always take away the square of it. And then we'll say that this is equal to 0. And then all we have to do now is just combine these two numbers here. And that's our completed square version of this quadratic. Alright, so now you know the basic steps of how to complete the square for quadratics. Here's how to complete the square for these difficult quadratics where we've got a number before the x squared. And this is quite a lot harder. It's a grade 9 topic. And the first thing we have to do is we have to factorize out this term before the x squared. And we have to factorize it out of the first two terms in our quadratic. I see some people factorize it out of the last term as well. That's completely unnecessary and just makes it a bit harder. So let's do that. We factorize out the 2, giving us 2, and then brackets x squared minus 6x, because if you expanded this out, it'd give you the minus 12x, so it's still legitimate. And then we keep them plus 10. Forget about that until the very end of the question. And next, all we have to do is complete the square for whatever is inside this bracket. So what we're going to do is we're going to put another bracket in here. It can help actually to make this a square bracket, just to remind you that they're different. And x, and then minus 3, because minus 3 is half of minus 6. And then we put that inside our square bracket. And then, of course, we're going to take away minus 9. So even though it's a negative, we're still taking away the square. And, sorry, that shouldn't be there. And then the square bracket again, just to remind us that this minus 9 should still be multiplied by the 2, but we'll do that later. And then keep the plus 10 there. Right, so when we expand out the square bracket term with the 2, all we have to do is literally just attach the 2 to the square bracket, and that's it. And then obviously just 2 times minus 9 is going to give us minus 18. The plus 10 just still stays there. So you see why we didn't have to factorize it out, factorize the 2 out of it. And then we'll just combine the minus 18 and the plus 10 to give us minus 8. And then this is our final complete the square term. Now, how does this 2 being here affect the turning point? Well, the truth is not at all, because if you think about it, once we make this squared term equal to 0, it doesn't matter what we multiply it by. Like, this could be 1,000 here, this could be minus 500 here. No matter what, this whole term right here is still going to be equal to 0 if this squared bracket is equal to 0. That means all we need to do is just put in the 3 as normal, and of course the minus 8 for the y term. Alright, so now I've shown you how to complete the square. It's your turn to have a go. For this one, complete the square and find the turning point. For this one, find the two values of x by first completing the square. And for this one, just complete the square because it's one of those tricky ones with a number before the x squared. So we'll start with this top one here. And we're going to set up the squared bracket, which is the thing I always like to do first. And then we're going to put the x on here without the square, and then half of this term right here. Now, you could do this as a decimal, but I always like to keep it in a fraction form because that's much easier when you try to square it, all right? So put 5 over 2 in here, no x attached or anything. And we're going to take away the negative of the square of this. Now, you could use a calculator for this if it's a calculator exam, but you should be able to do this on a non-calculator paper. Just do 5 squared, so 25 over 2 squared, so 4. And then, of course, we keep the plus 10 right here, and that's all equal to 0. Then just rewrite this out again, and then 10 minus 25 over 4 should be equal to 15 over 4. Sorry for the little delay right there. And then that's going to be equal to 0. And then this is the complete square form, and finding the turning point, again, always the easiest part of any of these questions. Just the negative of what's in here, so minus 5 over 2 and 15 over 4. So here's how to find the two values of x by completing the square. The first thing we're going to do is set up our square brackets with the x term squared and then half of the minus 8, so minus 4. And then, of course, we've got to take away the negative of this minus 4 right here. I mean, the negative of the square of this minus 4, sorry. So minus 16, because minus 4 squared is 16, so we take away that. And then minus 20 equals 0. And then we can just combine the minus 16 and the minus 20 to give us minus 36. and that's equal to 0. And then all we have to do from here is rearrange to find the two values of x. Remembering, of course, that we'll get the positive and negative square root of 36, but we'll get onto that. So first we're going to have x minus 4 squared equals 36, because we've just added 36 to both sides. And then next we're going to square root both sides. And that's going to give us x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 36. Because of course, negative square root of 36 also equals 36, because a negative times a negative equals a positive. And hopefully you should know that the square root of 36 is just 6, so we can say that's plus or minus 6. And then now all we have to do is add 4 to both sides, so we can say that x equals 4 plus or minus 6. But since this isn't actually a term, we should probably separate it into the two possible, since this isn't a surd, we should separate it into the two possible values. So we can say that x is either equal to 4 plus 6, so 10, or it's equal to 4 minus 6, so minus 2. And those are our two solutions. And last but not least, our final question. Here's how to complete the square with a tricky term in front of the x squared. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to factorize out the 3 from the x squared term and the x squared and the x term, leaving the final term alone. So we're going to have 3, and then the big square brackets, just to remind us that they're separate to the brackets found in the completed square term. So we're going to have 3 and then x squared plus 6x, and then keep that minus 10 out there. And then now we're free to complete the square just inside of these brackets. So we're going to have x plus half of 6, so 3 squared. And then we're going to take away 3 squared, or 9, giving us minus 9. And then keep that inside of the square brackets, of course. Minus 10 equals 0. And then now we're going to have to expand out the 3. So we're going to attach it to the x, the complete square term. You can't really expand this out anymore without expanding out the x plus 3 squared, which kind of defeats the whole point of completing the square. And then 3 times minus 9, giving us minus 27. Minus 10 equals 0. And then we can just tidy this up by combining the minus 27 and the minus 10 to give us minus 37. And it won't always be equal to 0. It could just be an expression like this. But yeah, this is the final completed square version of this quadratic.